Right, so I'll just be opening the meeting this afternoon. Greg will actually be chairing, and we have Buddhi today who will be presenting his PhD research. So it all sounds very exciting. Before we start, I would just like to acknowledge the custodians of this land, that the University of Western Australia is on Whadjuk Noongar people's land, and to pay our respects to them as the traditional custodians of this land. Before we start as well, I just need to pass on Martin Forsey's apologies. He had something on and couldn't make it this afternoon. And I think that's all from me. So Greg, did you want to take over?
Okay, thank you very much. So today's presentation is a pre-submission presentation, the last we will be having during his candidacy of Buddhi Chaudhary Tharu. Buddhi completed his Master of Agricultural Science from Tribhuvan University, Nepal in 2004, and subsequently a Master of Arts from Hiroshima University in Japan in 2011. And his MA thesis for that second degree, second MA, focused upon freed bonded laborers, Mukta Kamaya, in the Tarai, the lowland agricultural plains of Nepal. And subsequently, he had a professional Hubert H. Humphrey Fellowship at the University of California in the Davis campus that focused on agriculture and rural development in Nepal during 2015 to 2016. He's worked more than a decade in non-governmental organizations in Nepal, and that work has drawn upon research from a number of fields: agriculture, food security, community development, and human rights. After submitting his thesis, which is very, very imminent, he is looking to work for international agencies in the field of agriculture, biodiversity, environment, and rural development. And he'll be speaking today on parts of his thesis, which is entitled Climate Change Perception, Vulnerability, and Adaptive Agricultural Practices of the Tharu in the Western Tarai of Nepal. Over to you, Buddhi.
Thank you very much, Greg, for your kind introduction. So welcome everyone from both Anthropology and Sociology and School of Agriculture and Environment. So today I'm going to share the comprehensive form of this PhD thesis, and the topic has already announced. It's about the climate change perception, vulnerability, and adaptive agriculture practices of the Tharu in Western Tarai of Nepal. And this picture you see, there is a farming just both sides of the river, and this is practiced normally when the flow of water is less during the dry season. But in the monsoon and summer season, it is totally flooded, and there is no way for farming. And it is one of the adaptation strategy of local people in flood-prone area that also practice in the my fieldwork area. So before starting my presentation, I would like to acknowledge the Tharu community who participated in this research, and UWA and Australian government for providing me research training scholarship for PhD, and of course my supervisors, Dr. Gregory H. and Professor Katie Glaskin from Anthropology and Sociology, and the Professor William Skin from the School of Agriculture and Environment, and Dr. Buddhi Chaudhary from Agriculture and Forestry University, and he's also participating in today's meeting. He was a local supervisor, particularly supported me during the fieldwork and drafting some of the chapters. It is just to give you the outline of presentation. It divided into like a couple of sections, starting with introduction about the climate change and justification of studies, and then research sites and methods. Then I will enter in the result parts, perception and vulnerability, then adaptive capacity and strategies, local agriculture practices, and then discussion and conclude this presentation, maybe within 30-35 minutes. When we talk about the climate change, it's a global issue affecting all sectors across the globe. And when we talk about the Nepal, it's more serious because Nepal is one of the 10 most vulnerable countries from the climate change. And the increment of temperature is higher than the global prediction, that is 0.056 degrees Celsius per year, and the rainfall is also very erratic and unpredictable. In this picture, you see there the Nepal is divided into 5 physiographic region, and the lower part, this red one, it is called Tarai, that is lowland of Nepal, the only plain part that has basically the humid and tropical climate, and its elevation is less than 200 meters from the sea level. And the projection of temperature is also very high in case of Nepal, because it is projected that the temperature can increase up to more than 1 degree Celsius by end of 2030s, and the rainfall will also increase by 2 to 6%, particularly during the post-monsoon period, that can cause flooding, landslide, and other various type of problem that affect natural resource management as well as agriculture. Because when we talk about the agriculture, it's very, very sensitive in terms of climate variable, especially temperature and rainfall. Most of the crop that staple crop, we say rice, wheat, and maize in Nepal, they are sensitive to temperature. If temperature goes beyond 30 to 34 degrees Celsius, then it affects on the fruit sets, and because of the fluorescence and other physiological changes. Not only to this, it also affects the insect ecology, affecting predator, affecting pollinator, and also affecting the severity of weed disease insected that may be very severe in the non-prevalent areas. Therefore, there are various arguments for addressing this global problem of climate change, but it is the scientists are agreed that it's a complex problem, but it cannot be solved with a single, like a technical problem, because it is more related with this with the social, cultural, and people's psychology, behavior, all these things for adaptation and mitigation. And indigenous knowledge is very, very important for the farming people and the people who live in the rural area, because it is one of the major part of their way of livelihood and way of their survival. And when we talk about the indigenous knowledge, it's about the local and culturally specific, practical, that generated in informal context and generational experience and tested in nature. And the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations has distinguished this, what is the indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, and local knowledge. And it is clearly said that indigenous knowledge has some sort of connotation or relationship with the indigenous people. But the traditional knowledge, they are more in rural and more isolated from the science and technology, but they are somehow related with the indigenous and tribal people. And the last one is the local knowledge that is irrespective of any tribal or indigenous group. Therefore, I will be following this differentiation throughout my thesis when I talk about the indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, and local knowledge. But when it comes in case of Tharu in the Nepal, in the indigenous knowledge system, it is largely focused on ethnobotanical knowledge, and some of the research are focused on food and beverages. But there are very limited studies in documentation of this indigenous knowledge and practices in agriculture, though they are one of the frontier of agriculture in Tarai of Nepal. Therefore, this study has 3 specific research questions. The first question is dealing about the perception, how they are feeling and they perceive, and what sort of impact they are observing. And the second research question is about what are their capacity actually to adapt the vulnerability, and what type of strategy are they taking to deal with this problem. And the third and last question is what are the knowledges in agriculture and climate change sector and agriculture sector, and what type of agriculture adaptive practices they are practicing, and if they are practicing, how they are adaptive. So I'll be dealing all these questions throughout this presentation. Now I want to enter in the second part of this presentation. It's about the fieldwork and the research methodology. And this research is based on the Buddhi district that lies in the western part of Nepal. That's why I said it's the western Tarai of Nepal. And this is the district map of Nepal. And this one is representing the municipality, Bullaria municipality, like a suburb here in Australia. And these two villages, this Thapua and this Bikri. These villages are, by physical distance, they are approximate, like 5 to 7 kilometer distance, but they are distinct in terms of climatic vulnerability. The first thing is this village is surrounded by the rivers and stream, and there are no all-season road and bridges to go to in this village. So it is more rural in nature and very close to the forest. And the people in this, farmer in this village have very small size of land holding, like less than 0.5 hectare. But the another, this one is more flood prone village, and the farmers are normally bigger land holding size and very close to the district headquarters, like city. In this research, I used mixed method, this sequential mix method. The research is conducted in 6-month fieldwork. The first 4-month field visit was focused on quantitative data collection through the household survey, and I surveyed all household of both villages, equal to 229 household, 86 in Bikri and 134 in Thapua. And the second field visit for 2 months in 2018, during November, December, it was focused for qualitative information through the focus group discussion that is conducted in 7 groups, interviews with farmers and village head and other officials, local officials, and then participant observation, observing the specific event like rice transplantation and other rituals in the village. So the quantitative data was analyzed through the SPSS software, and qualitative data is transcribed and analyzed manually. But I also used the NVivo software to identify the major themes and its interrelationship. Now I want to share some of the results of this study, and the first one is perception and vulnerability. When we talk about the perception, it's about the feeling and realization of people through the various climatic stimuli. And stimuli may be because of the change in the variable, and stream may be too hot or too cold, and other stream like drought and flooding, this type of, because this stream and measurable shock that help to build the perception of anyone. And the vulnerability is about the susceptibility. It's an inability to cope with the adverse effect. And in this first picture, you see the river in both villages that that eroded the agricultural land, and hundreds of hectares of land are already converted into riverbed farming. That's why they are practicing riverbed farming that I showed you first slide. Now, about the perception of Tharu people, one climate change indicator. it looks a little bit complex, but let me make it simpler. There are 7 bars that represents the indicator of climate change, and many of them are related to temperature and rainfall, and some of them are insect disease, weed, and so on. Say, for example, let's take the first bar. It's about the increased monsoon temperature. And the third bar is decreased monsoon rainfall. So through the household survey, the response of respondent were recorded in 3 options. If they are perceiving positive change, then it is represented in this yellow color. And if they feel no, it's not changing, then it's represented by this purple color. And if they think no, it's similar, there is no change, then it's represented by the blue color. So from this graph, it is very clear that vast majority of the respondent, more than 2/3 quarters, they have positive responses on climate change, this indicator. So to verify or to triangulate their information, we had some this mathematical or some this calculation of this local weather of particular area where research is conducted. And this temperature data is obtained from the government of Nepal, from Department of Hydrology and Meteorology. And the data, the 38 years data is divided into equal groups to see if there are any changes, increase or decrease in the temperature. After analysis, what we found, the annual maximum temperature is increased by almost 1 degree Celsius, and the annual mean temperature is increased by 0.6 degrees Celsius. And that significantly increment in 5% level of significance. It means we can say confidently 95% confidence level. Similar to this, we also tried to triangulate the rainfall trend in the area, but we cannot triangulate, or we cannot justify the perception of Tharu people that the decreasing rainfall trend, because the interannual variation, the year-to-year variation of this rainfall is very high. So it's not significant. So we can't say there is a decrease or increase in temperature in rainfall. The next exercise we conducted is ranking the disaster or hazards in their villages based on the focus group discussion. And the villager ranked that flooding is the #1 disaster in both villages. As you see in this picture, the village is normally after 2-3 years or periodically it's flooded and has multiple effect on economic, social, cultural, and various aspects of lives and livelihood of villager in the area. And the second important hazards for the Bikri, this small village, is drought, because they don't have regular source of irrigation. But in Thapua, it's different. It's about the storm, because it coincides with this maize growing season, and it lost massive lodging of maize. And the third one is cold waves, because nowadays they feel that foggy weather and a drastic decrease in temperature, and on top of that, the winter rain make their life hard and also affect the agriculture commodities. And in terms of drought, one of the participants has shared me that it has not very impactful, or people are not realizing the impact of drought because there is not complete failure of crop. But previously there was that type of problem, because before during 1979 and 1988, rice was totally dried in the field. So we cut it and fed it to cattle. Rice planted in this lowland did not develop grain as well. and had terrible food scarcity in the village, so borrowed this parabolic rice from the money lenders, and they had to repay back after long times because of the high interest rate. So there is a problem of drought, but there is not complete failure, so they don't have realization like flooding. Now the second part of result is about the adaptation and adaptive capacity. In this picture, you see the installation of boring is increasing in the village because the water requirement is increasing due to the long this drought period during the agriculture period. And when we talk about adaptation, it's about the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate change and its effect. And adaptive capacity is determined by various type of livelihood capital. It's not by just a technical matter. You can give like this technology, you take it and just solve the problem, but it is determined by various livelihood component that I will discuss later on. The first exercise we did is we try to find out the important factors that affect the adaptation of improved agriculture practices as well as adaptive agriculture practices. And for that, we performed this small statistical tool, this binary logistic regression with number of indicators. I had selected 12 indicators, and among these 12 indicators, 3 of them were found significantly impacting the determining the adaptive capacity, and they are education of household health, farm size, and access to extension services, because education is important for planning and implementation of adaptation and mitigation strategies. And farm size are farm and land ownership is one of the way of production, but it also have a social and cultural value in the society. And the extension services that have input and output, buying and selling the produces that affect their adaptation of the practices. The next exercise we did from the focus group discussion, it's about the spider web analysis to find out the tentative adaptive situation of the farmer in both villages. So there were like 10 to 15 participant in each focus group discussion, and their rating is rated based on this 5 livelihood capital: physical, human, social, financial, natural capital. And for each this livelihood capital, 5 indicators were selected in a group, so that based on that indicator they rated 1 to 4. If the situation is worst, then it is rated 1, and if it is best, then it is rated 4. So based on that, what we can say that the adaptive capacity that vary with the village and also vary with the gender, because we also plotted based on the gender. In terms of the village, this Thapua village have better adaptive capacity than this Bikri village, basically because of the access to the market and having a better, larger size of land ownership. And in terms of gender perspective, this women have fluctuating type of adaptive capacity, but the male have more consistent adaptive capacity, we can say that. But some of the capitals like financial and social capitals that seems higher in women, and it is because of the women are collecting money in the group so that they can borrow money in the difficult situation, and they also have better connection with their relatives and friends to get support and during the disaster and post-disaster condition. This is one of the version of the participants who shared that women are particularly restricted for performing agricultural activities like plowing land and constructing bond in the Tharu community, and that obstruct them to full practicing agriculture, so that they cannot separate with the like the bigger, larger family side, or with the they need at least men for continuing the agriculture practices. And to address this type of problem, they are the farmers or villagers, they have practicing various type of multiple type of adaptation strategies, both in agriculture, and that's not enough. So they are also practicing non-farm based adaptation strategies. In agriculture, we can say some of the example are like change in the cropping pattern. One very tangible change in the cropping pattern is the summer season maize that used to cultivate in June, July is now cultivated in December, January, and it is one of because of the economic factor, but also there is the greater chances of waterlogging during the June, July, and also availability of short duration of rice, so that they can grow a crop in even the upland rice field. And the second sort of this strategy is relating to income diversification through wage labor, both skilled and non-skilled type of labor, including carpentry, house construction, scaffolding, and so on. And more recently, in the last decade, this migration is increasing in the abroad, especially in the Gulf and Middle East. And youth, especially young boys, are going for the migration to fulfill their household need, as well as to address this type of problem. Now, the second last part of result is indigenous knowledge and practices. And in this picture, just I'm trying to show that there is something wrapped in the this small bundles and hanging in the house, and it is one of the typical Tharu indigenous practices for protecting sweet potato in the household level. And the respondent, they said that they can save 80% of sweet potato in this technology. But nowadays they are also protecting, they are keeping sweet potato in the cold storage because of availability of the facilities. So not only these practices, there are many such indigenous knowledges and practices that I have mentioned in the thesis, but here I want to share just one example. It's related to weather prediction. And these are the indicators of how they combine their knowledge with the modern weather forecasting system. And their indicator can be categorized into biological indicator and physical indicator. And you can see they use variety of indicator to know the whether rain will to detect the rainfall. For example, ant carrying eggs to safe places, hen spreading feather under the balcony, cattle jumping, crying by keeping its tail straight. These are the indicators of rain. And in contrast, if there is no rain, then they detect from the velocity and the season of wind. If during the July to September, if easterly wind comes, then maybe the rainfall will be delayed or maybe late. Similarly, this is the special type of wind that blows during the October-November during the rice harvesting period, and it is called Ravonia. And if it blows from the southeast corner to the northeast corner, then farmers know there is a late in the rain, or there won't be a rainfall. So this is just an example. There are many such indigenous classification in agricultural land, classification in weeds, classification in season, and based on their season, they practice agriculture rituals and agriculture activities. And in this picture, you see this is one of the Tharu traditional institutional practices that last week we were discussing about the Adat system in Indonesia, that we have also this type of practices in Tharu village that we call, it's a burger system that govern the village for the community work and other so many administrative purposes, though it is not officially recognized by the local government and state government. And there are the shaman or traditional healer is also elected by the villager to perform the village level this type of rituals. Say for example, this is the village shrine where village deities are kept, and a special type of ceremonies are performed by the shaman. And it is one of the example is hareri, that is specially performed for the better green and healthy agriculture production. And khirban, this is a biomedicine prepared by the shaman, and it is poured in the head gut of the irrigation canal so that it can reach all the farmers' fields so that crops become green and healthy. And during this season, they also perform this Gandhi rice bug. This is one of the important insect, and they remove through the ritual practices by smoking rice straw along the three sides of a field and fruiting the deer horn. And shaman at the end took a pair of Gandhi and salon it alive through for the ritual purposes. And now the last part of the result is about the adaptive agriculture practices. And in this picture, you see farmers are cultivating more than 2-3 crops in a single field, because it protects them from the total crop failure, and it also increases the food diversity for the smallholders. And there are a lot of many traditional agriculture practices that I am not going to talk all about them, but just I am going to share these 3 practices that I already shared you about the mixed cropping, and the 2, this relay sowing and zero tillage. These are the special traditional agriculture practices practiced in the Tharu and other communities in the area that have special impact on adaptation as well as reduction emission of greenhouse gases, and also sequestration of carbon. So they are important in terms of climate perspective. And the relay sowing is a method of broadcasting the winter crops in the standing rice crop before harvesting at least two weeks earlier, so that once the rice is harvested, it attains the, in this picture you see, once rice is harvested, it attains the certain height, so it has ample vegetative and reproductive growth, so it may have better yield and production. And another this technology is zero tillage and no tillage. This is maybe use of the seed driller or minimum tillage with the tillers, and also even without tillage. Like this is the no tillage practices in the garlic, that garlic bulb is inserted in the harvested rice stalk for production. So what I try to see these practices, I try to compare the in terms of how their yield farmers reported the yield. And in this graph, you can clearly see that the conventional tillage, I compared the yield under the zero tillage and conventional tillage. Conventional means full fledged of tillage with the machinery that are available, maybe moldboard or like harrow and so on. So the yield under the conventional tillage was found significantly higher than the zero tillage, but in the yield under the mixed cropping was found significantly higher than the sole crop, means cultivating a single crops. Apart from that, there is an increasing trend of using hybrid rice and maize varieties, use of irrigation technologies, inorganic fertilizer, and recently the use of herbicide and pesticide is also increasing, especially in the wheat and maize crops. Now, based on our theoretical discussion and our result, we have a pictorial diagram to make a short discussion. That idea was first coined by Professor William Erskine. So in this picture triangle, here there are three indigenous knowledge systems: indigenous knowledge system, local knowledge system, and scientific knowledge system that we are discussing from the beginning. And under these practices, these are the practices that we discussed. And this, the left-hand side, it's a contribution of mitigation and adaptation. If it contributes positively or better way, then it is indicated as a positive, and if it's a do not contribute or even the worse, then it's represented by negative. And this is the yield and profitability, because it is very one of the important determinants for the small farmers. So based on overall our discussion, what we found that the yield, the indigenous and local practices, agriculture practices that may be adaptive and resilient to climate, but they might have lower yield than the scientific practices and technologies. That's our tentative conclusion from the above discussion. At the end, I would like to conclude this presentation that we have three broad conclusions. The first is the perception is an important for adaptation and mitigation, because unless people perceive, they don't make planning and implementation for adaptation. And from our analysis, we can't just blame that indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge are just unscientific and they don't work in the scientific world, because it matched with their perception and the scientific data. They are matching, and it's not only in my case. There are several such cases and stories around the globe. And the second conclusion is adaptation is determined by various sociocultural factors. Though climate change is a technical issue, but its adaptation may be determined by various sociocultural factors. So to address that issue, dealing with technicality is not enough. So we have to consider the broader social capitals that we discussed. And the final conclusion is traditional agriculture practices are important and adaptive, resilient, but yield may be lower than the modern agriculture practices. Therefore, farmers go for the hybrid agriculture practices, adapting from traditional practices as well as modern agriculture practices. And these are some of the photographs that I participated during conference during my PhD. I participated in one conference in the Hanoi. It's about climate change responses and sustainability in 2018. And where we had publication in proceeding. And the second one I participated in 2019, climate smart agriculture in Bali, and poster presentation. And during that time, I also shared my result with the postgraduate student at Udayana University. Thank you, Pak Greg, for arranging this event. And thank you. And at last, this is the picture, one of the traditional Tharu Indigenous technology for restoring grain crops. And with zero energy, the grain crop can be stored for 4 to 5 years without any deterioration. Thank you very much. And your suggestions, comments, and inputs are very welcome, because I'm still in this revising and finalizing the thesis so that I can incorporate it. Thank you very much, Greg. I finished it.
Okay, thank you very much, Buddhi. Could you stop screen sharing now so we can get to a view of all the participants? Fantastic, thank you. If people can, if they could want to ask a question, if you could click on participants and you get the right-hand column, and down towards the left bottom, you can see raise hand. If you click on that, then I can see that you have a comment to make or a question to ask. Otherwise, I'll periodically try to go to gallery view to see people waving their hand if they can't do that on their picture. But we have the first question from Ram Pandit. So please proceed.
Okay, can you hear me, Buddhi?
Yes, please. Yes, sir. I'm
okay.
hearing very well. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing your interesting research. It's quite relevant, knowing a little bit about the context and the place where you did research, so I can certainly attest that. I do have two clarifying questions to you about some of the things you mentioned, which I did not get clearly, but you can perhaps help me to understand that. The first one is about adaptive. You did some sort of analysis and your dependent variable is adaptive practice or something? Logistic regression or probability regression you mentioned. What does that mean? I'm not clear on what you mean by adaptive practice. Any form of adaptive things, adaptive agriculture or adaptive practice farmer has done, or what is that? That's one. And the second one is in the capital framework, you showed 5 different capitals. And then in your spider diagram, you have from 0 to 5. I'm wondering what that 0 means. And then how did you measure, let's say, natural capital? Okay, I'll stop there.
Yeah. Thank you very much for a very relevant question. I try to respond this, but maybe it will be also hard to me for this regression, because I also get support from other friends from the economics department, especially Vivek. I don't know whether he is participating or not today. So
my question really is what's your dependent variable? It is 0, 1 as I see, but how did you measure that? Or what does 1 mean, or what does 0 mean? That's the main question.
So I'm going on that point. So in logistic regression, it is coded 1 if they adapted the agriculture practices, and 0 if they don't adapt the practices. So in adoption, there are 6 indicators that determine whether they are adapting their practices or not. And these 6 indicators majority of them were from this modern agriculture practices like improved seed, inorganic fertilizer, herbicide, irrigation technologies, and what else? So on. So among 6 indicators, if they have adopted at least 3, then we consider yes, they are adopting. So we marked 1. If they are not adopting just 2 practices, then we said no, they are not adopting. So we coded with 0.
Okay.
So the dependent variable is adoption of agriculture practices, and independent variable is that I said 12 indicators.
No, I think I'm fine with that. Yeah. But on the dependent variable side, that's where my question was. And I still have a question, but I don't want to ask that now. I'll give it to some others. I would like to hear about my second comment.
Yes, second comment is the rating of adaptive capacity. And for each this livelihood capital, say for example, physical capital. For physical capital, we have 5 indicators. And natural capital, we have 5 indicators. Example, natural capitals, we consider land, river, access to forest, and so on. So based on that situation, they marked 1 to 4.
Okay.
And based on that, the total value is identified, and that value is then average value is calculated, and the drawing of spider web is average value of average
Okay.
value.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I will learn the first one later on with you.
No worries.
Okay, other questions? So far, I'm not seeing any more blue hands. I'm going to gallery view. Anybody wildly raising their hand? Okay, if not yet, I'm going to ask a question that has more to do with the implications of your study than the content of it. So, given the status of the Tharu as a minority group, although one of the larger indigenous groups in Nepal, what are the prospects that their indigenous knowledge and practices would be taken on board by the government of Nepal in designing appropriate agricultural policies for that region, the Western Tarai or the Tarai as a whole? I mean, is there any evidence, for example, that any indigenous knowledge or practices have been incorporated in what the extension services provide, especially since you noted that access to extension services is one of the three most significant factors in adapting adaptive agricultural practices. So, what are the prospects that the value of indigenous practices and knowledge are going to be acknowledged by the government of Nepal and have an effect on agricultural policy in the future?
Thank you, Greg. It's a complex question. So I could say the traditional agriculture practices that I described, this relay sowing, mixed cropping, this different type of tillage system, this riverbed farming, and these are not specifically for, I can't say this is specifically for the Tharu. That's why I said it's a traditional agriculture practices. These are the farmers' practices from the generation, and these are practiced in the larger area in that region. So they are already in practice, and the research institution of government of Nepal is also conducting such type of research about the profitability of the system. So that part is positive, that government and local research institution, even the national research institution, are considering that practices. But when we talk about specific indigenous agriculture practices related to Tharu, there are not much explored. Example, I showed the last slide, the crop storage technology or the potato storage technologies. There are some qualitative research, but the research from the research institution and its expansion is not well proceeded, because in response to this, there are the modern technologies and practices that are readily available. So farmers are also attracting towards such type of practices, because it's easy for them, and after finishing this, they can engage in other profitable ventures and activities. But there are some ritual practices and traditional or practices that are particularly suitable for that locality, that environment, or that cultural context, that are even incorporated in the incorporated with the modern technologies. Say for example, they are cultivating the hybrid rice, but the method of preparing the land or maintaining the soil nutrient or controlling the insect pests and diseases. There are so many indigenous knowledge systems that are that have been practiced in the modern practices, but they are not much researched, and I hope there are this needs to be addressed. That I shared. One is the khirban that the Tharu people poured in the head gate of the irrigation canal, that is especially prepared by this plant-based medicine. And I have list of material what they put in that, and it needs to research what is the efficacy of that type of practices. And I hope tentatively I could say that have the some insecticidal property of certain plants, but in the detail it needs to further research. I don't know, Greg.
Okay, thank you.
Whether I have answered or not. Thank you.
Yeah, Ibu Tina, you're next in line.
Thank you, Pak Greg. When you call me Ibu Tina, means Ibu. This must be something, something difficult after this. Okay. Thank you, Buddhi. It's very inspiring findings from your research. I have two questions. My first question regarding the technical matters. Is there any difference approach you applied when you come to these two research locations? I mean, are there any different characteristics of these two places? So you have to apply a different approach to these two research locations or not? Okay. My second question. Maybe I didn't kind of catch the details of your presentations, but based on your research findings between these two research locations, which one do you think will have kind of more sustainable adaptive practice of climate change in the future? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tine, for the two questions. And the first one is about the research approach in two villages. So previously, one cycle, there is no different approach for studying two villages, but I try to see the particular differences between two villages with various characteristics. But in terms of this climate vulnerability, there is differences, and the adaptation practices, there is a differences. But in terms of social and cultural perspective, there is not much differences, because all of the household from the same this Tharu community, and I selected these villages because there are predominantly the larger number of household of Tharu. But in terms of vulnerability, the Bikri village that is more vulnerable than in terms of drought, because they don't have irrigation facilities and they don't have electricity. Than another place. But in terms of the sustainability, or in terms of the use of traditional practices, in terms of using the various forest-based resources and using various plant-based medicine for agriculture, livestock, and human beings. This people from the bakery, they seem more inclined toward the sustainable way of doing, because in the next village, the Thapua, that's very close to the city and also share border with India, and there is very easy access for getting all agriculture inputs like chemical inorganic fertilizer. Even in Nepal, there we have shortage, but in that area they can easily access from the India, and they have massively cultivating this improved like hybrid rice, inorganic fertilizer, and pesticide, herbicide, all of these. And because the another reason maybe they have larger size of land holding, and they are more toward the inclined toward the modern agriculture practices. Isn't it really? Because you have read more than me my thesis 4 or 5 times. So
Okay, any other questions? Not seeing any blue hands here. Rampandit, you had another question?
Just filling the gap. Do you have any? I just want to come back to your earlier question, Greg. The policy implication, how the government could utilize some of your findings about these indigenous and local communities and their practices to address or to mitigate some of the vulnerability raised by climate change. I think it's a very important question in the sense that not only in Tarai, but if you look at the mountain areas where the climate change is going to have a severe impact on the Himalayas, when the glaciers are going to melt, it is going to affect all along from Himalayas all the way to Tarai, if you look at the rivers and so forth. So I think communities could develop their adaptive capacity based on their traditional practices. That's the one element which Buddhi highlighted. But how it will feed into the government policy, how they will emphasize these things where appropriate, so that they become more adaptive to the changes. I think there are some these indigenous and local community specific groups advocating climate change specific policies, what to do, what not to do. But you might be willing to get in touch with that sort of advocacy group who are feeding this information or talking about these things to the government, so it might get into the platform where it should reach. Just in my observation, going back to your question, that might
very
help.
good.
But this is a serious issue.
Yeah.
It's going to affect many different ethnic and ethnic communities in different parts, not only in Western Tarai.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, definitely. I will approach and try to find out.
Okay, we're moving very close to 3:30 now. Are there any other questions? Not seeing a blue hand. I've got it on gallery view. I'm not seeing any raised hands. But then let me ask one final quick question. You had one quote from a woman whose husband had for several times gone off to India and Qatar and other places. And you talked about livelihood diversification as one strategy and coping with climate change. Is this an area that is experiencing feminization of agriculture? Is it in either of the two villages or both of the villages? And if so, is that having any impact on the adaptive strategies, deployment of local knowledge and such that you're seeing in the area?
Thank you, Greg. It's a very interesting question. Like Tharu people, there is not complete feminization in agriculture. They are from very traditional. They are the farming people, even they don't have land, they sharecrop other crops, other field, and they do like contract farming, other type of, but they want to engage in agriculture. Not only this, from the very beginning. That's why they were also the bonded labor system, bonded laborers in agriculture that that I did my masters in during the masters. So the youth, they particularly those who have very small size of land and they can't survive in agriculture, and they don't have, if they don't have opportunity of getting this casual this wage labor in domestic and local market, then they go to the this abroad. And now it's increasing because they are finding getting it's a little bit better money in terms of having just engaging in agriculture in the very small size of land, less than 0.5 hectare, even small. But there is some cultural like stigma, like people who are living in the this disaster hazardous area, like flood prone area. They don't want to marry their daughters in that area because she will be definitely suffered from the flooding and other type of problem. And the women have still, they are restricted to perform some of the agricultural activities. That's why males are needed for the agricultural activities. But there is not a feminization like is in eastern part of Nepal and the hills of Nepal, that our other friends, they are doing research there in with Ramsar and with Ramsarya in how this abroad migration impact in agriculture and other aspect. I think you did.
Okay, thank you. We've just gone beyond 3:30, and I'm not seeing any other hands, flesh-colored or blue at this point. So let's draw to a close, and if we could all give whatever sort of applause we can, virtual, shown on the screen or whatever. Thank you, Buddhi, and I will hand it over to Ibu Utari and Ibu Dorinda to close off the session.
Thanks for that, Greg. Thanks, Buddhi, as well. That was lovely. Seeing there's quite a few comments for you in the chat, actually, of people who had to leave and going, congratulations, a really interesting topic, and we really enjoyed it. So you might want to scroll through that and read that. Okay, next week we have our last seminar for this semester. We will be having two presentations. One is a research proposal, which is a half-hour session. That is by Charlotte Loram. And following that, we will have Lynn Malone, who will be presenting her second PhD, what do you call that? Buddhi called it the exit seminar. So she'll be presenting that, but that will be an hour. So it will be a longer session than usual, 1.5 hours. So we will see you then. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Namaste, everyone.
Yep.
Namaste. Bye.